When I first stumbled upon Triangle 2009, I didn't expect to be haunted by it for days. It looked like one of those mid-budget psychological thrillers that you might half-watch on a lazy evening. But within 20 minutes, it had already begun to whisper something darker. It isn't merely a film about a ship lost at sea. It's about the way guilt traps us inside loops of our own making. My literature-loving friends, if ever there was a movie that deserved to be studied as both a riddle and a confession, this is it. The opening moments lure you with deceptive simplicity. Sunshine, calm water, a mother named Jess trying to prepare her autistic son for the day. She looks exhausted but hopeful, her eyes carrying the ache of someone balancing fragility and duty. Then the movie tilts, literally, when she joins a group of friends for a sailing trip. The weather is perfect, the conversation banal, and you almost sigh at the ordinariness of it all. But ordinary is a trick. What Christopher Smith, the director, is doing here is tightening the first loop of a noose that the viewer doesn't yet feel around the neck. A sudden storm crashes over them like divine punishment. One moment sunlight, the next a wall of black water, swallowing everything. The sailboat capsizes, people disappear. Jess surfaces in disoriented silence. Out of the fog emerges a vast ocean liner, gleaming and empty, as though time forgot to tell it's supposed to be dead. They climb aboard. From that point forward, reality begins to fold in on itself. Corridors repeat. Shadows move where no one stands. The ship's clocks are frozen at 8:17. It's the kind of dread that creeps rather than jumps, the horror of something familiar seen from the wrong angle. Jess wanders through those endless corridors like a sleepwalker searching for meaning. At first, she behaves like the archetypal final girl, alert and cautious, the one who will survive because she notices what others miss. But then the movie performs its first betrayal. The threat stalking them is Jess herself, or rather, versions of her, multiplying, replaying, killing, dying, and starting again. When she finds her own handwriting scrawled on a mirror or corpses of her friends piled in impossible numbers, the viewer feels a primal vertigo. We're no longer in a linear thriller. We're in a punishment designed by guilt itself. It's tempting to reduce Triangle to a time loop gimmick, yet its structure feels more like mythology than science fiction. Each loop is an echo of Sisyphus pushing the same boulder, of a soul trying to rewrite one unforgivable moment. Jess isn't trapped in time. She's trapped in conscience. The film never confirms whether the supernatural elements are real or metaphoric. Instead, it blends them so perfectly that interpretation becomes participation. You aren't watching her descent into madness. You're being dragged down with her. What makes a film unforgettable is its emotional precision. Most thrillers rely on revelation. This one relies on recognition. Every time Jess begs the universe for another chance, every time she promises, "I'll fix it this time," it hits that secret chord of human regret we all carry. Haven't we all wished for one more chance to redo the moment we ruined? But the movie's cruelty and brilliance is in showing that endless chances become hell. Repetition is a redemption. It's torture. Christopher Smith directs with surgical calm. He doesn't flood the screen with effects or noise. Instead, he builds a horror from geometry. The echoing symmetry of hallways, the looping camera pans, the careful replication of scenes. The editing feels like déjà vu incarnate. The longer you watch, the more you start anticipating patterns rather than surprises, as though you too are caught inside the ship's logic. Even the color grading contributes. Bleach blues and grays drain warmth from the image until the world looks embalmed. The ship itself becomes a mine, rusted, echoing, and merciless. Melissa George, playing Jess, gives a performance that could easily be studied in acting workshops. She shifts between confusion, terror, and eerie calm with microscopic control. The brilliance lies in how she doesn't overplay the horror. She lets the camera find it on her face. There's a moment where she stares at her reflection, realizing she's a threat. And the fear isn't of dying, it's of remembering. You can almost feel her pleading not with fate, but with herself. "Please, let me forget what I did." That's when Triangle transcends its genre. It stops being a thriller and becomes a confessional tragedy. By the time the final act loops back to the beginning, to that blinding sunlight, that familiar drive, that small child waiting by the door, you understand that you've been watching a ghost story told by someone who doesn't know she's dead yet. The twist isn't a twist at all. It's revelation disguised as routine. Jess's nightmare isn't random, it's penance. And the ship, eternally waiting at the horizon, is a purgatory she's earned. I won't spoil the exact details for those who haven't boarded yet, but I will say this. The ending isn't meant to shock. It's meant to wound quietly. The final image, a reflection of infinite return, asks a terrible question. If redemption demands awareness, can someone ever truly repent when they can't escape remembering? That's the strange alchemy of Triangle, a small, unassuming film that manages to feel cosmic. It's about motherhood, guilt, morality, and the human mind's cruel genius for self-punishment. It belongs to that rare class of horror that doesn't scream. It murmurs, "Look closer." And once you do, you realize the real monster was never time, nor fate, nor the storm. It was love, twisted by regret. So if you're stepping into this voyage with me, keep your eyes open, my friends. The next corridor you turn down might already have your footprints on its floor. The film begins under a cruelly bright Florida sun. Jess is getting her young son ready for a day that looks ordinary, an image so harmless it feels suspicious. She's exhausted, moving through the morning like someone who hasn't truly slept in years. Her son spills paint. She snaps, then instantly apologizes. That split second of frustration, that guilt in her voice, is the seed of everything that follows. Before we even leave the house, the movie has already whispered that something has gone wrong in this woman's life. When she drives away from her home toward the harbor, she looks distracted, almost haunted, as if she's leaving behind more than a house, perhaps a version of herself she can't stand to face. At the marina, she joins Greg, a mild, good-hearted friend who seems fond of her. His yacht, the Triangle, waits under blue skies. Along with Greg's two guests, Downey and Sally, and another couple, Victor and Heather, they prepare for a casual sail. Their laughter feels forced, the way laughter always does when people are trying to fill silence. Jess arrives late, claiming she had to deal with her son's school situation, though something in her voice sounds off. Greg senses her tension, but doesn't press. The ocean looks serene. The radio hums faintly. Everyone relaxes. The tone is calm enough that the first gust of wind feels like an omen. Within minutes, the air shifts. The horizon darkens. The radio dies. The wind collapses into an unnatural stillness, then screams back as a wall of storm clouds devours the sky. The storm sequence is pure sensory panic. Lightning splits the screen. Rain becomes a vertical wall. The Triangle capsizes in seconds. There's no slow build-up, no warning. When silence finally returns, the survivors float in a wreck of splintered wood and soaked sails. Heather is missing. The survivors cling to the hull, waiting for rescue, surrounded by a sea too flat to be real. Then a massive shadow appears through the fog, a passenger liner gliding silently toward them, white paint blistered, windows dark. Its name is Eelis, the mythic god of winds. They board the ship, calling out for help, but no one answers. The decks are immaculate yet deserted. Silverware rests on tables. A child's toy lies on the floor. A clock reads 8:17 and refuses to move. Smith shoots the sequence like a dream. Long hallways, polished brass, carpets muting footsteps. The camera keeps drifting slightly behind Jess's shoulder, so we share her unease. She insists she's been here before, and everyone dismisses it as trauma. That déjà vu becomes a first real clue that we're not in ordinary time anymore. The first 40 minutes unfold like a ghost story disguised as realism. The group explores separate parts of the ship, calling to each other through echoing corridors. Jess keeps glimpsing movement, a flash of blonde hair, a reflection that isn't synchronized, a door closing by itself. The tension builds not from what we see, but from what repeats. Greg finds food still warm in the dining hall. Sally notices a fresh tear in her dress that she can't remember making. Time itself feels stuck. Then Jess drops her keys and finds another identical set lying beside them. Someone's been here, she says. She's right. It's her. Soon, the killings begin. Victor becomes aggressive after claiming he saw someone who looked like Jess attacking the group. He tries to restrain her. In the struggle, he dies. Downey and Sally panic. Greg vanishes. Gunshots echo down the hallway. The mysterious shooter wears a sack mask. Jess runs, terrified, until she corners a figure, only to discover it's another version of herself. The recognition is wordless. The masked Jess hesitates for just a second before being thrown overboard. Our Jess looks over the railing, shaking, and sees the ocean calm again. A moment later, a small group of survivors appear below, waving for help. It's the same people, boarding the same ship at the same time. The loop has closed. What makes this first half so masterful is how naturally the impossible creeps in. There's no moment of grand revelation, only the slow realization that cause and effect have collapsed. Jess keeps trying to warn the others, but the dialogue repeats verbatim. Even the ship's layout begins to feel wrong. Staircases leading back to where they started, hallways reshaping like memories refusing to fade. When she finds a pile of her friends' corpses, each arranged in identical positions, the horror shifts from survival to repetition. She hasn't stumbled into a ghost ship. She's a ghost that never leaves. Melissa George's performance during these scenes carries a fragile precision. You can see awareness dawning in fragments. The way she touches objects, the tiny pause before she speaks, as if the lines of fate are running ahead of her. The camera starts mirroring her earlier movements, literally replaying shots from different angles. We realize that every time she fights to save someone, she's only enacting what's already happened. The paradox locks tighter. Her attempt to change fate caused a tragedy she's trying to undo. By the midpoint, Jess starts to understand the ship's cruel arithmetic. Every time she dies, another version arrives to replace her. Every time she tries to stop the cycle, she completes it. There's no beginning, no end, only recurrence. The Eelis becomes less a vessel and more a moral equation, one soul divided infinitely by guilt. In Greek myth, Eelis was a keeper of winds, trapped between heaven and sea. Here, he's the warden of remorse, steering Jess through an endless tempest of her own making. The first half closes on an image that feels biblical, Jess staring at the calm ocean after throwing her masked self overboard, thinking she's finally free, as a new boat approaches and the same voices call for help. The sunlight returns. The same clock ticks to 8:17. Her face goes still, torn between horror and resignation. Somewhere, faintly, we hear a child's laugh echo through the wind. That's when you realize Triangle isn't going to give you escape. It's going to give you recognition. The first loop has completed. The punishment has only begun. The second half of Triangle opens where the first one folded on itself. An illusion of time finally collapses. Jess stands on the deck of the Eelis, staring down at the new arrivals, her friends, alive again, calling out for rescue. The horror doesn't come from jump scares or violence anymore. It comes from recognition. She whispers no, as if trying to command the universe to stop. But the cycle doesn't care. It restarts automatically, indifferent to her awareness. The sunlight flickers. The same dialogue repeats. The same laughter echoes. This time, however, Jess moves differently. She knows where she is, what's coming, and what she must try to prevent. Her dread has matured into strategy. She decides that if she can somehow protect everyone, maybe the loop will break. What follows is a meticulous reenactment of earlier events, but now filtered through Jess's knowledge. We watch her shadowing her friends from hidden corners, trying to alter outcomes. She hides behind walls where she once walked openly, listening to the same conversation she remembers from minutes ago. The filmmaking mirrors her growing despair. The camera doubles back to the same spaces. The sound design layers echoes from previous scenes, and faint whispers bleed through walls. The editing creates a sense that the ship itself is aware of her attempt to change fate, and is mocking her by replaying her failures. Her first plan fails immediately. Victor attacks her again, but this time she hesitates, knowing how it ends, and that hesitation leads to the same accidental death. The cruelty of the loop isn't just in repetition. It's in how knowledge becomes useless. Every act of awareness accelerates the trap. She finds Greg's body again, shot in the same position, but when she grabs a gun from his hand, her fingers already remember its weight. She knows it belongs to her. The realization spreads like a fever. She isn't just caught in a circle, she is a circle. Then comes a moment that defines the entire film. Jess discovering the pile of dead Sallys. She follows a trail of blood to a corner of the deck and finds corpses of her friends stacked grotesquely, like offerings. Some fresh, some decomposed. Their identical faces look up at her like an accusation. The sight breaks something inside her. She staggers back, retching, whispering apologies. She understands now that she has been here countless times before, that this is not her second or third loop, but perhaps her 100th. Every version of her has screamed the same words, fought the same battle, and failed the same way. The ship isn't a haunted place. It's a prison built out of remorse. Soon, a new masked figure appears. Jess chases it through the corridors, desperate to end the pattern. When she finally unmasks it, she sees her own face again. This time, older, bloodied, eyes hollow by repetition. The doppelganger pleads with her to kill them all and end it, as if suggesting that annihilation might free her. The sequence is shot with dizzying symmetry, the two Jesses mirroring each other, one trembling, the other hardened. In killing her other self, Jess becomes what she feared. She dons a mask and continues a cycle. The tragedy is total. Self-awareness doesn't grant escape. It grants replacement. After this moment, the film fractures deliberately. Time overlaps. We begin to see events from previous loops, but from new angles. The camera follows the version of Jess we saw earlier in the movie, revealing that the original villain was her all along. We watch her chase herself, kill herself, and throw herself overboard, completing the pattern we once perceived as chaos. Christopher Smith's direction during these scenes feels almost surgical. Every repetition clarifies rather than confuses. The viewer realizes that there are no missing pieces, only an infinite puzzle that folds perfectly onto itself. Then, the tone shifts again, from cosmic horror back to human tragedy. Jess washes ashore, coughing seawater, half believing she has escaped. The sea looks calm, ordinary, forgiving. A taxi driver appears out of nowhere and offers her a ride home. The driver, an older man with eyes too calm for coincidence, becomes one of the film's most quietly terrifying figures. He never says who he is, but everything about him, his knowing tone, his insistence that she'll get back soon, feels mythic. Viewers have debated for years whether he represents Sharon, the ferryman of the dead. The license plate reads AO 317, a nod to Eelis, and the clock frozen at 8:17. Even outside the ship, she's still within its logic. When Jess arrives home, the sunlight is exactly as it was in the opening scene. Her house, her son, everything is identical. Only she has changed, bloodstained, exhausted, her mind fractured by what she remembers. Then comes the film's most painful revelation. Her son, frustrated and anxious, spills paint again. She snaps, screams at him, and accidentally kills him. The loop's origin is unveiled. It began not on the ocean, but in this moment of maternal violence. Her guilt bursts a storm, the ship, the eternal return. Panicking, she cleans the scene, puts on fresh clothes, and hears a horn from a harbor. Greg's voice calls out, inviting her on the trip. The universe resets itself, calmly, cruelly. But the film isn't done twisting the knife. Jess places her son's body in her car, drives toward the harbor, and hits a seagull on the way. She stops, picks it up, and throws it aside, only to see a mound of dead seagulls in the same spot, just like the pile of corpses on the ship. The repetition has crossed into reality. The camera lingers on her face as she begins to break down, realizing she can't undo what she's done. Then, a crash. Her car collides with a truck. The world goes white. When she wakes, she's standing on the roadside, uninjured, watching her own body in the wreckage. The taxi driver appears again, silent this time. She gets in. The final scenes loop perfectly back to the beginning. Jess returns to harbor, steps onto the triangle, and greets her friends with the same weary smile. The sea is calm again, the light golden. The audience knows what she doesn't. It's all about to start again. The circle closes, tighter than before. The title reveals its final meaning. The triangle is not just a yacht or the three sides of a paradox. It's the eternal trinity of guilt, punishment, and denial. When the screen fades to black, you're left suspended between pity and dread. The film never explains the mechanism, never resolves a mystery. It doesn't have to. The point is not how the loop exists, But why? Jess's punishment isn't cosmic. It's moral. She is trapped until she forgives herself. And since she never can, time is no exit. The last image, a seagull lying motionless on a road under blinding sunlight, suggests that the loop will continue forever, just out of sight, just beyond understanding. Somewhere, the ship waits, the storm gathers, and a mother whispers one more promise she'll never keep. This time, I'll get it right. That's the quiet devastation of Triangle. It begins as survival horror and ends as existential allegory. It isn't about escaping the ship. It's about realizing the ship is you. The brilliance of Triangle lies in how it builds a psychological labyrinth entirely out of one character's guilt. Every figure who steps onto the ship, the friends, the masked killer, even the taxi driver, exists primarily as an echo refracted through Jess's mind. Once you understand that, the film changes shape. It stops being a thriller about a haunted ocean liner and becomes a metaphysical drama about identity, memory, and punishment. My literature-loving friends, what you end up watching is not a group of people fighting to survive, but one fractured soul arguing with itself. Jess, played with unsettling precision by Melissa George, is the gravitational center of this nightmare. In the film's first moments, she appears tired but tender, like a single mother merely worn down by life. She moves carefully, speaks softly, and seems gentle with her son. But beneath that surface there's strain, the kind that comes from living inside too much regret. Her house is immaculate in a way that feels nervous. Her smile flickers like a light trying to stay on. By the time she joins a sailing trip, she's already a ghost, moving through the world with the quiet desperation of someone pretending that normality still exists. As the movie loops, Jess fractures into multiple versions of herself. One is a caretaker, trying to fix everything. Another is the aggressor, killing to reset the sequence. And somewhere deep inside them both hides a mother who cannot forgive her own mistake. Each version is real, because guilt rarely has just one face. Melissa George plays all of them with microscopic modulation. A change in posture, a tightening around the eyes, a half-second delay before speaking. The audience can tell which Jess we're watching even before the camera reveals it. That subtlety is why the film never feels like a science fiction trick. It feels like a psychological autopsy. In classical mythology, Eelis controlled the winds. Here, Jess controls the storm. She is both creator and prisoner of her environment. The ship reflects her subconscious. The endless corridors are her recurring thoughts. The frozen clock's inability to move past a single moment. When she discovers piles of dead versions of her friends, it isn't meant as gore. It's symbolism. Each corpse is a failed attempt at redemption. The masked killer, once terrifying, becomes tragic when you realize that her own future self, desperately trying to kill the latest version to force an ending, she is literally at war with her own instinct to rewrite the past. Greg, Downey, Sally, Victor, and Heather, her companions, function more as moral archetypes than individuals. Greg represents compassion and patience, qualities Jess cannot extend to herself. Victor is a skeptic, a part of her that still denies guilt. Downey and Sally embody judgment, the voices that accuse her even when she pleads ignorance. Their deaths repeat because her internal accusations never stop. She keeps trying to silence them but cannot, because they are echoes of her conscience. The script cleverly gives each of them small, mundane quirks, so they still feel human. Downey's protective tone toward his wife, Sally's anxious chatter, Victor's youthful irritation. These details make their repetition all the more haunting. The humanity she keeps destroying is her own. The masked version of Jess, often referred to by fans as Sackhead Jess, is perhaps the film's most disturbing presence. She moves with mechanical purpose, her voice filtered into something almost genderless. When she speaks, it's like hearing guilt given form. Her insistence that killing everyone will end it mirrors the psychological impulse of denial. If I destroy the evidence, maybe the crime disappears. But every time she kills, she only strengthens a loop, proving that violence against the self cannot cleanse the soul. What makes this doppelganger tragic rather than monstrous is that she believes she's helping. She isn't cruelty personified, she's despair weaponized. Then there's a taxi driver, a brief but unforgettable character. His calmness after the car crash, his promise to get you back soon, and his quiet nods all mark him as something otherworldly. Whether he's sharing ferrying souls across the Styx or merely death disguised as courtesy, he represents acceptance, the one thing Jess refuses. His car becomes a bridge between life and repetition, a place where choice still exists. Every time Jess steps inside, she's offered the chance to let go. Every time, she insists on returning to the harbor. It's the film's saddest metaphor, redemption waiting patiently beside a soul too stubborn to accept it. Jess's son, though he appears briefly, is the story's emotional key. He is innocence lost, the moral compass she can no longer follow. His paint-spilling scene is ordinary in action, but mythic in consequence. Her snap of anger, her moment of cruelty, becomes the original sin of her private mythology. She loves him fiercely. That's never in doubt. But love without self-control becomes destructive. Every loop on the ship is a distorted reenactment of that incident. Chaos, anger, panic, cleanup, and denial. She keeps killing versions of herself the way she metaphorically killed her child's trust. The film structure mirrors the parenting cycle turned tragic. Discipline, apology, promise, repeat. What makes Jess such a compelling character is that she embodies a paradox of guilt. She knows she did something unforgivable, yet she refuses to believe she deserves punishment. Her determination to fix it feels righteous, but beneath that righteousness lies pride. She wants the world to reset on her terms. That's why she keeps boarding the ship again and again. It's not repentance. It's control disguised as penance. Her tragedy is that she mistakes repetition for redemption. Director Christopher Smith ensures that Jess's psychology bleeds into every cinematic choice. The ship's reflective surfaces turn each corridor into a hall of mirrors. The editing fractures her personality into temporal shards. Even the costume design helps. Her beige dress gradually darkens with blood and grime until she looks like a living bruise. By the time the loops have multiplied beyond counting, she seems less human and more elemental, like guilt given flesh. Supporting performances serve her story rather than compete with it. Michael Dorman's Greg radiates compassion. Liam Hemsworth's Victor simmers with misplaced aggression. Their deaths hurt precisely because they don't deserve them. They represent the good people destroyed by someone else's obsession with self-absolution. Yet, ironically, they're also Jess's internal voices, each pleading for release. In mythic terms, Jess is both sinner and Sisyphus, forever pushing her mistake up the mountain of memory, only for it to roll back down. In cinematic terms, she's a study of trauma replay. How people relive their worst moment not out of masochism, but out of the unconscious hope that this time they'll change the outcome. Triangle understands that hope is the cruelest trap of all. By the end, Jess ceases to be an individual and becomes an idea, the soul that refuses closure. Her eyes in the final scene, calm, resigned, stepping onto the yacht yet again, contain everything the film has to say about human nature. We are creatures of repetition, haunted not by death but by the parts of ourselves we can't forgive. That's why Triangle endures. It gives us a protagonist who isn't a hero or a victim, but a mirror. Jess shows us the infinite loops we all build inside our minds, the conversations replayed, the regrets rehearsed, the tiny violences we justify. And she reminds us, with a kind of heartbreaking tenderness, that the scariest ghosts are never strangers on a ship. They are the versions of ourselves we refuse to bury. Every movie carries a few strange secrets in its making, but Triangle, 2009, feels almost designed by fate to be mysterious. Even its production seems to exist in a liminal zone, part indie psychological thriller, part metaphysical experiment. The deeper you look into it, my literature-loving friends, the more you realize how many small, uncanny coincidences mirror the story's own obsession with repetition, reflection, and myth. To start, Triangle was shot in Queensland, Australia, while pretending to take place in Florida. The irony of filming a movie about dislocation in a place so geographically far from its setting already feels symbolic. The production used 2 actual ships, one for exteriors and one for interiors, built as a labyrinth of repeating corridors and staircases. Crew members often reported getting lost on set. Melissa George joked that she sometimes walked into the wrong corridor and ended up back where she started, not realizing the art department had duplicated the walls. The sense of being trapped in a loop wasn't just performance. It was lived experience. Christopher Smith wrote the script after reading about the myth of Sisyphus and the concept of eternal recurrence in Nietzsche. He wanted to make a horror film that played like philosophy. To structure the loop, he literally drew triangles on paper, each vertex representing one version of Jess. The middle of the shape represented her guilt, the origin point that the film never escapes. That's where the title came from. It doesn't refer only to the yacht. It's the geometry of moral recursion. An eerie coincidence. During filming, the cast nicknamed the ship the Ghost of Eelis before realizing that Eelis, in Greek myth, was indeed the keeper of the winds and master of the sea. Smith hadn't consciously chosen that name when he wrote the first draft. It came to him, as he said later, because it sounded lonely. Only later did he research the myth and find it perfectly matched the story's theme, a mortal trap between divine forces, doomed to repeat a cycle of guilt and forgiveness. Sometimes storytelling pulls old archetypes through us without our knowledge, as if myth remembers on our behalf. Melissa George's performance required her play up to 9 versions of Jess, each with subtly different psychological states. To keep track, she kept a color-coded journal on set, red pages for the aggressor, blue for protector, green for the confused newcomer. Between takes, she'd flip to a page to remind herself which loop she was inhabiting. When you watch her switch emotions mid-scene, that precision comes from methodical self-mapping. She said later that it was the most mentally exhausting role she'd ever done. I had to live the same nightmare 100 ways, and each time believe it was a first. The film's budget was only around $12 million. Tiny for something that required full ship sets, storm effects, and complex continuity. To save money, Smith reused the same corridor sets multiple times with slight changes, different lighting angles, prop placements, or stains. He later admitted that the repetition accidentally heightened the mood more than any planned design could have. The audience begins to notice changes even when they don't know why, he said. It's like their subconscious is keeping score. One of the strangest production facts involves the seagulls. The crew trained a small group of real seagulls for specific shots, especially the sequence where Jess hits one with her car. But during editing, they realized they had accidentally filmed a gull landing in the exact same spot across 3 different takes from different days. The visual repetition was so uncanny that Smith kept it, saying it felt like the film was directing itself. The weather also seemed to conspire with the narrative. During outdoor shooting, storms kept arriving unplanned, forcing production delays. Instead of rescheduling, Smith used a natural gloom to enrich the look. When you see lightning flicker in the background of early yacht scenes, that's real lightning. It feels prophetic, the sky foreshadowing what's about to happen. The cast later joked that Eelis was angry. Smith's editing process was another exercise in controlled chaos. Because the film relies on perfect repetition, editors had to track each loop with spreadsheets marking which Jess was active and which version of every prop appeared in each scene. For instance, when Jess drops her keys, that single object appears in 6 different shots across 3 loops. Continuity errors would destroy the logic, so they built a loop Bible, a document over 100 pages long mapping time signatures and cause-effect chains. That Bible is still studied in some film schools as a model for nonlinear narrative editing. Another fascinating trivia: the film's runtime is 99 minutes, exactly 3 times 33. Smith confirmed that was deliberate. 33 minutes marks one theoretical loop within the story, divided roughly by each act: introduction, recognition, and repetition. He believed the viewer's subconscious would feel that mathematical rhythm, even if they didn't notice it consciously. Fans have long speculated that the taxi driver in the final act was a nod to Greek mythology's Charon. What's strange is that Smith originally wrote him as an anonymous Good Samaritan, but when they cast the actor Henry Nixon, they realized his calm, unearthly presence changed the tone of the scene. In post-production, Smith added a faint low-frequency rumble under the driver's dialogue, almost inaudible, creating a sense of subterranean vibration, like a ferry crossing a river. It's the sound of myth hiding beneath realism. The choice of the clock stopping at 8:17 has its own mysterious logic. 8 plus 1 plus 7 equals 16, the number of squares in a magic squares row, and, in numerology, a symbol of karmic debt, whether coincidence or subconscious design. The film's fixation on that number reinforces the idea of an unpaid moral balance. Even stranger, Christopher Smith claimed in an interview that the idea for triangle came to him in a dream where he was on a cruise ship hearing someone call his name from another deck. When he looked, it was himself waving back. He woke up before seeing what happened next. Years later, when he finally watched the completed film in a screening room, he said he experienced a wave of déjà vu so strong he had to step out for air. It was like the film had been waiting for me, he said. Another eerie anecdote. Melissa George admitted she could never rewatch the finished movie. I left something of myself on that ship, she said. When I see her eyes, I know she's still there. For a story about infinite recurrence, that sentiment feels almost prophetic. Perhaps the strangest fact of all is how Triangle predicted the critical afterlife it would have. Released quietly in 2009, it underperformed in theaters but developed a cult following years later on streaming platforms. Viewers discovered it, discussed its theories, looped analyses on YouTube, repeating, dissecting, re-experiencing it endlessly. The film about repetition became itself a repeated experience, watched over and over by new audiences searching for clarity. That's the final paradox behind Triangle. It's a story that infects the medium it inhabits. Its set design looped itself. Its weather mirrored its myth. Its audience became its next iteration. Even now, every time someone presses play, Jess wakes again, the storm gathers, and the ship appears out of fog. The strangest fact is that Triangle never ends. It just keeps finding new viewers to pull aboard. When Triangle first arrived in 2009, it didn't roar into cinemas like the storm it portrays. It slipped quietly into select theaters and then, almost like its own cursed ship, disappeared from mainstream attention. Critics at the time didn't know what to do with it. Some dismissed it as an overcomplicated horror experiment. Others sensed it was something deeper but couldn't quite name it. Years later, however, the tide turned. The film began to attract scholars, critics, and fans who recognized it for what it really was, a meditation on guilt, morality, and eternal recurrence disguised as a genre movie. My literature-loving friends, it's one of those rare cases where a film had to be forgotten before it could be understood. The early reviews tell a fascinating story of misunderstanding. In 2009, mainstream publications categorized Triangle as a survival thriller akin to The Descent or Ghost Ship. Many audiences entered expecting straightforward scares. What they encountered instead was a cyclical narrative that refused to offer closure. Critics complained that the plot didn't make sense, unaware that its meaning lay precisely in its repetition. The Guardian called it a puzzle box that locks itself, while Empire magazine described it as brilliantly frustrating. But some, even then, caught the philosophical undercurrent. Kim Newman of Sight and Sound noted that the film uses horror tropes to interrogate determinism, a line that predicted the academic readings that would follow. As years passed, film theorists began to approach Triangle through multiple lenses: psychological, mythological, even theological. The dominant interpretation sees Jess's journey as a cinematic purgatory. She's not merely caught in time. She's stuck in moral recursion, reliving her sin until she accepts it. The ship becomes the architecture of her mind, rooms of denial, corridors of consequence. That reading draws heavily from eternal return theory, particularly Nietzsche's concept that every act must be relived infinitely until the soul transcends attachment. In that sense, Triangle joins a philosophical lineage that includes Groundhog Day and Mother, but cloaks itself in horror rather than comedy or allegory. Another wave of criticism came from feminist film scholars, who reframed Jess not as victim but as subject. They argued that Triangle reclaims the trope of the final girl. Instead of surviving male violence, she endures her own. Her endless repetition of trauma reflects the cultural reality of women forced to relive guilt through social expectation. The cycle of judgment, where she must prove her virtue, confess her sin, and face punishment, echoes centuries of patriarchal narrative. By the time she reaches a taxi driver, she has already internalized every accusation. Scholar Joanna Paul wrote that Jess performs her penance as ritual, not redemption, suggesting that her loop represents society's demand that women continually atone for imperfection. That feminist reinterpretation transformed Triangle from a horror oddity into a psychological mirror for collective guilt. Mythological analysis adds yet another layer. Critics drew parallels between Jess and figures from Greek tragedy, particularly Sisyphus, Ixion, and even Orestes. Like Orestes, Jess commits a familial crime, harm against kin, and is pursued by the furies of conscience. Like Ixion, she's bound to a wheel, endlessly spinning as punishment. The ship's name, Eelis, ties directly into classical symbolism. Eelis kept the winds bottled, and when released, they cause chaos. Jess, too, tries to control what cannot be contained: time, guilt, motherhood. Each loop becomes a windstorm she unleashes upon herself. The film thus operates as modern myth. Its dialogue minimal because myth speaks through symbol, not speech. Interestingly, theologians also enter the discussion. Some Christian reviewers interpreted the story as a portrait of damnation. Jess, unable to repent sincerely, traps herself in an unending state of sin. The taxi driver becomes a guardian angel or death figure offering grace, which she rejects by boarding the yacht again. Others saw her persistence as an image of hell, the refusal to accept divine forgiveness. But even among these theological readings, there's empathy. Jess isn't an evil soul. She's a suffering one, an everyman figure representing humanity's refusal to forgive itself. From a cinematic perspective, critics have praised Triangle as an early example of psychological looping cinema, predating later cult successes like Coherence, 2013, and Time Crimes, 2007. What distinguishes it, they argue, is emotional coherence amid temporal chaos. Many loop films focus on mechanics, what triggers a reset, but Triangle roots the loop in psychology. The more you understand Jess's mind, the more the structure makes sense. It's not a puzzle to be solved, but a wound to be felt. Film festivals gave Triangle its quiet resurgence. When it screened at Fright Fest in London, audiences walked out dazed. Some debated whether Jess was dead. Others argued she was dreaming. But the conversations didn't stop. Over the next decade, Reddit threads, YouTube analyses, and university lectures dissected the movie scene by scene. What emerged was consensus: Triangle may be the most emotionally coherent time loop film ever made. Its refusal to explain itself became its authenticity. Another critical perspective views the film as a commentary on storytelling itself. Each loop is an act of narration. Jess retells a story, alters details, but can never change the ending. It's a metaphor for creative process, an artist rewriting the same trauma through new drafts, always trapped by the origin of pain. Some critics compared it to Mulholland Drive in that both films dissect female subjectivity through fragmented timelines. Jess, like Diane Selwyn, tries to create alternate realities to escape responsibility, only to be destroyed by the truth she constructs. Audience reception evolved alongside these interpretations. The film's cult following grew through word of mouth. Viewers discovered it on late-night television or streaming, rewatched it obsessively, diagrammed the timelines, argued about the true version of Jess. In doing so, they enacted the film's logic themselves, repeating, analyzing, returning. In a way, the fandom became part of the loop. Each rewatch reinforced the movie's central lesson: that understanding does not equal escape. There's also a fascinating discussion about its place in British cinema. Though set in Florida, Trial belongs to the lineage of British psychological horror. Films like The Wicker Man or Don't Look Now, where terror emerges not from monsters but from moral revelation. British critics later claimed it as an overlooked national gem, a film that uses genre to explore metaphysics. Its director, Christopher Smith, came from a background in horror, creep, Severance, yet Triangle marked a dramatic evolution in tone. Instead of jump scares, he built existential dread. The film's minimal score also drew attention from music critics. Harry Cohen's ambient sound design functions like a heartbeat through eternity, steady, low, unrelenting. One critic noted that the sound mix subtly increases frequency with each loop, raising subconscious anxiety even when scenes appear identical. This technical precision deepened academic appreciation. Triangle wasn't just narratively complex. It was psychoacoustically designed. In later retrospectives, critics often mention how Triangle anticipated the cultural mood of the 2010s, an era obsessed with regret, repetition, and self-surveillance. Its central image, a woman watching versions of herself commit violence, predicted the themes of identity and accountability that would dominate media discourse. In that sense, Triangle was prophetic. It arrived before we were ready to face its implications. Today, Triangle stands as a rare example of a horror film that grew wiser with time. It transformed from misunderstood thriller to philosophical cult artifact. Each layer of criticism, psychological, feminist, mythic, theological, adds another loop of meaning, reflecting the film's very structure. Critics no longer argue whether it makes sense. They accept that its power lies precisely in refusing closure. And maybe that's the most profound critical insight of all. Triangle doesn't ask to be solved. It asks to be witnessed. Just like Jess, we keep returning to it, hoping to find something new in the repetition. And every time we do, we end up right back where we started, haunted, fascinated, humbled by how the human mind can build its own eternity. Behind the scenes, Triangle 2009 was a far stranger and more intimate experience than its modest scale would suggest. It wasn't one of those massive studio undertakings with hundreds of crew members and lavish sets. It was a small, highly coordinated creative experiment filmed under unpredictable weather and psychological pressure. What makes its production fascinating, my literature-loving friends, is how the process itself seemed to imitate the movie's themes: repetition, confusion, exhaustion, and sudden flashes of clarity. In many ways, the crew lived through their own version of the loop. The production began in 2008 under Icon Productions, the same company that financed Braveheart and Apocalypto. Christopher Smith, coming off the success of Severance, pitched Triangle as a time loop tragedy set at sea. The executives didn't immediately understand it. They kept asking if it was a ghost story or a thriller, and Smith kept saying, "It's a guilt story." He envisioned the film as a psychological puzzle, where atmosphere replaced exposition. Once the producers realized how contained it was, a single ship, 6 actors, they gave him creative freedom but a limited budget of roughly $12 million. That small scale would prove crucial. Smith could control every detail like a stage play. The Eelis was built in sections inside a soundstage in Queensland, with mirror hallways to create the illusion of infinite corridors. Production designer Melinda Doring used a repeating geometric pattern for the carpets and railings, subtly forming triangles throughout the set. Some are visible only in brief shots. Others appear subconsciously in composition. Doring later admitted she wanted viewers to feel trapped inside the shape itself. Even the ship's architecture was an argument. Its staircases deliberately disoriented, its symmetry so perfect that crew members genuinely lost their sense of direction. Smith loved that. "I wanted them confused," he said, laughing in interviews. You can't film disorientation unless everyone's actually disoriented. Melissa George trained for weeks before filming, not just physically but psychologically. Because she played multiple versions of Jess, she rehearsed every scene from several emotional angles: fear, aggression, exhaustion, denial, so that Smith could later decide which version belonged in which loop. To help her maintain orientation, she taped numbers inside her sleeves corresponding to each cycle. For instance, J1 was a confused newcomer, J3 the killer, J5 the resigned observer. Some days she performed 5 loops out of order before lunch. "It felt like emotional vertigo," she said later. "By week 2, I didn't know which version of myself was real." The shoot lasted 10 weeks, though the film's internal timeline covers only 1 day. Because of limited budget, scenes set on the yacht, and the storm had to be shot outdoors in quick bursts. The storm sequence was filmed in a giant water tank using rain towers and wind machines, but Queensland's real weather kept intruding. The crew joked that nature was trying to co-direct. In one instance, lightning struck near the tank, briefly knocking out power. When they checked the time afterward, the digital clock on set had frozen at 8:17, the same time as in the film. Everyone went silent for a moment, half amused, half spooked. Smith kept the story quiet during production, fearing tabloids would spin it into a haunted film set. Continuity became the crew's greatest challenge. Because everything repeated, even small prop placements mattered. The keys, just drops, the bloodstains on the wall, the position of a corpse, each had to be perfectly consistent across loops. Script supervisor Lisa Smith developed what she called the Loop Bible, a 120-page document tracking every repeated moment with color codes and diagrams. It became legendary among the crew. Pages were taped to walls, and new staff were told, "Read the Bible or be lost." The film's most difficult shot was a long tracking sequence where Jess chases her masked self through the corridors. It required complex choreography between the actor and the camera team, moving through identical sets while maintaining seamless continuity. To achieve the illusion that there were multiple Jesses interacting, they used body doubles and digital compositing. The trick worked so well that even crew members couldn't distinguish between real and composite shots during playback. Smith later said it was a moment he realized he could turn guilt into geometry. Sound design was treated almost like an additional character. Instead of composing traditional score, Smith worked closely with sound editor Stuart to build layers of ambient noise. Ship creaks, faint footsteps, reverse wind patterns. These elements subtly shift between loops, altering pitch and echo to create subconscious disorientation. In some scenes, Hilliker reversed audio from earlier moments and embedded it under dialogue. Viewers who slow down the sound mix have identified faint whispers that are actually Jess's own lines played backward, a literal echo of her past actions haunting her. It's one of the film's most chilling subliminal details. One of the funnier behind-the-scenes stories involves Liam Hemsworth, who played Victor early in his career. At 19, he was still relatively unknown, and the crew affectionately called him the baby. On set, George often teased him for constantly checking whether his loops made sense. "Don't worry," she'd say, "nothing here makes sense." Years later, after Hemsworth became famous for the Hunger Games, fans revisited Triangle and were stunned to see him as the ill-fated deckhand. Smith joked, "If we'd known he'd become that famous, we would have killed him twice." Another curious detail: the car crash sequence was shot on a closed road in just 2 takes because the team couldn't afford reshoots. In the second take, a real seagull accidentally flew into the windshield at the exact moment scripted. The bird survived unharmed, but the shot was so eerily aligned to the story that they kept it. The animal trainer on set reportedly muttered, "That gull knows the ending." Editing took 8 months. Smith and editor Stuart Gazzard built the timeline as a literal spiral diagram on their office wall. Every time they completed a loop, they taped a new layer on top. Visitors described the workspace as a conspiracy board for the afterlife. When the studio asked for a simplified cut, Smith refused, saying that confusion was essential. It's not supposed to be solved. It's supposed to feel inevitable. Post-production color grading gave the movie its distinctive drain palette. Cold blues and metallic grays for the ship, warm gold for land. The shift was subtle but psychological. The ocean world represents memory. The land represents denial. The transition between them, especially when Jess wakes on the shore, was deliberately colorless, signifying limbo. Marketing, however, was a nightmare. The distributors didn't know how to advertise a film that wasn't quite horror or sci-fi. The trailers emphasized a storm and masked killer, giving audiences the wrong impression. When viewers discovered a time loop parable instead of a slasher movie, many were confused. Only years later did the studio acknowledge the mismatch. Despite all that, the atmosphere on set was reportedly close-knit and strangely serene. Cast members described Smith as calm, deliberate, never raising his voice. "He directed like a clockmaker," said producer Julie Ryan. "Every gear turned exactly when it needed to." The irony, of course, is that his story was about chaos. A fun Easter egg most fans miss. Every clock on the Eelis shows 8:17 except one. On the ballroom wall, where the hands form a triangle pointing upward. That's the only hint of escape, yet Jess never looks at it. Smith said he added it for her, the version of her that might someday notice. Years later, when the film developed its cult following, the cast reunited for interviews. They laughed about how the movie had aged better than expected. "We were all trapped in that ship," George said. Now the audience is... The strangest twist of all is that Triangle production, like its story, seems endless. Every few years a new generation of viewers discovers it, analyzes it, and loops it back into relevance. That's the fun and poetry of its making. A film built on recursion became recursive in its creation. The cast lost their way in sets that repeated, the weather replayed the same storms, and the director mapped time on his walls like a theologian of déjà vu. Even off-screen, the loop never stopped. The setting of Triangle 2009 is the kind of space that feels both concrete and dreamlike, a place that exists in the world yet somehow hovers outside of time. The film's visual and environmental design works like an extension of Jess's psychology. The ocean becomes her unconscious, the ship her guilt-ridden mind, and the sunlight her illusion of normality. What makes the movie so captivating, my literature-loving friends, is how the setting itself becomes a character, one that never speaks but constantly remembers. Everything begins under a harsh, deceptive brightness. The Florida marina glows in gold and turquoise, colors associated with leisure and safety. But Smith and cinematographer Robert Humphreys film it with such polished attachment that even those cheerful tones feel artificial. The light is almost too clean, the sky too symmetrical, as if reality is holding its breath before collapsing. When Jess drives through these sunlit streets, there's already a faint distortion at the edges of the frame, a shimmer like heat on asphalt, hinting that the air itself might be unstable. That's one of the film's quiet visual tricks. The illusion of safety is always filmed as something brittle. Then comes the ocean. In most seafaring movies, the sea is alive, sparkling, rippling, breathing. Here, it's flat and silvery, an infinite mirror. The camera lingers on its stillness too long, forcing you to see it not as water but as a reflective surface. It mirrors the sky so perfectly that up and down begin to blur. The visual metaphor is obvious but powerful. Jess isn't sailing on water. She's sailing on memory. When the storm hits, that mirror shatters. The handheld camera work suddenly becomes chaotic, almost documentary in style, throwing viewers into the panic of being tossed around. But right after the storm, when the sea returns to calm, the frame returns to smooth symmetry again. The ocean is always waiting, patient, eternal. The Eelis, the great ocean liner that appears from the mist, is the film's masterpiece of design. It's modeled partly on 1930s Art Deco cruise ships and partly on the psychological geometry of nightmares. Its decks gleam, its hallways stretch too far, its doors are slightly too narrow. Smith intentionally avoided digital sets. Instead, production designer Melinda Doran constructed practical corridors that could be rearranged overnight so that the geography never felt stable. The lighting team used practical fluorescence instead of cinematic rigs, which gave the hallways that cold metallic glow, a look halfway between hospital and purgatory. Every architectural feature has symbolic intent. The endless staircases represent futile ascent. Jess's attempts to climb out of guilt. The mirrored walls symbolize self-confrontation. Even the color palette serves meaning. Beige and rust dominate the ship, tones of decay, mixed with dull brass reflections that mimic the shifting of memory. Smith said in interviews that he wanted the audience to feel like they were walking through a memory palace that keeps rearranging itself. It's an eerie, claustrophobic design that echoes Kubrick's The Shining, where the Overlook Hotel's impossible geometry mirrors its residents' unraveling minds. The Eelis works the same way. It traps not through walls, but through familiarity. The camera's movement reinforces this. Humphreys shoots many sequences from just behind Jess's shoulder, using a Steadicam that follows her at a human pace. This creates intimacy while also making the viewer complicit in her disorientation. When she turns corners, the camera hesitates. When she pauses, it breathes. The lens becomes a conscience, reluctant but loyal. And every so often, Smith breaks this rhythm with a locked, symmetrical shot of a corridor or stairwell, his visual punctuation marks. These shots are silent accusations, like the ship watching her. Lighting plays an almost metaphysical role. Notice how daylight disappears entirely once they board the Eelis. Even the upper decks are tinted gray, as if sunlight has been filtered through regret. Artificial lights flicker inconsistently, bathing scenes in pale gold one moment and harsh blue the next. This creates a visual rhythm of memory, warm for illusion, cold for truth. When Jess glimpses her reflection or a duplicate version of herself, the lighting always shifts temperature, a cue that she's slipping between psychological states. The editing contributes to the setting's uncanny texture. Instead of traditional cross-cutting, Smith often uses match cuts that fuse two time periods into one. Jess reaching for a door handle that's already open, her reflection moving a fraction late, sound bleeding across loops. These transitions blur physical space into emotional space, reminding viewers that geography in Triangle is internal. The ship isn't real estate. It's a labyrinth built out of remorse. Even sound defines place. The ship creaks constantly, but the pitch changes depending on Jess's awareness. In the first loop, the sound is crisp and distant. By the third, it's low and distorted, as if the walls are groaning under the weight of memory. The ambient hum that underlines every scene subtly rises in frequency through the film, imperceptibly tightening tension. And in scenes where Jess thinks she's escaped, the ocean becomes too quiet. That silence feels louder than any storm. The storm itself is an extraordinary cinematic sequence. Shot partly in a tank and partly on open water, it uses practical wind and real rain, making every splash and scream tactile. The editing intentionally breaks temporal continuity, cutting from lightning to calm to chaos again, so that the storm feels less like weather and more like the eruption of conscience. It's not just nature, it's morality taking form. Every time Jess insists, "It wasn't my fault," thunder answers her. The contrast between land and sea settings of the film's end is another stroke of visual genius. The return to land, with its washed-out sunlight and pale suburban tones, feels more unreal than the ship. Notice how the house looks sterile, overexposed. When she kills her son in the moment of frustration, the scene is flooded with warm light, as if divine judgment hides behind ordinary daylight. That overexposure symbolizes denial. The brightness blinds both her and us, making some look almost merciful. Then the camera cuts back to the road, where the car crash unfolds in cold, neutral tone, the return of truth. Symbolically, every color in Triangle tells a moral story. Blue is the color of illusion, the ocean, the sky, the dress she wears. Gold stands for false safety, the morning light, the ship's brass fittings. Red appears rarely but decisively, the moment blood is spilled or guilt acknowledged. When Jess's hands stain red, the palette momentarily intensifies, almost as if the film briefly remembers it alive before sinking back into muted tones. The editing's rhythm mirrors the loops themselves. Every act begins with calm, accelerates to chaos, then drops back into eerie silence. The pacing is mathematically structured, like a wave: build, break, retreat. Smith wanted viewers to feel time as a physical substance that keeps folding back onto itself. This is why each reset begins with that familiar gliding shot of the ocean liner emerging from fog. It's the film's visual mantra, its cinematic heartbeat. Cinematically, Triangle feels suspended between eras. Its digital clarity belongs to modern horror, but its compositions, long takes, architectural framing, symbolic geometry, recall 1970 psychological thrillers. There's a restraint to it. Violence is rarely shown, and when it is, it's brief, unglamorous. The focus is always on space, not spectacle. The horror comes from the structure of the environment itself. And yet, for all its precision, the setting remains emotionally resonant. The ship feels lonely. The sea feels judgmental. The light feels tired. Even the wind sounds weary of its endless work. It's as if the entire world of the film has grown bored of repetition, yearning for a release Jess won't grant it. That's the quiet miracle of Triangle. Its setting is not backdrop, it's the story. Every corridor, reflection, and echo is part of Jess's confession. The ship is her sin, the ocean her punishment, and the blinding daylight her denial. And when the final loop restarts, we understand the ultimate cruelty. She built the prison herself, and the walls remember her better than she remembers them. If you were to step behind a camera during the making of Triangle 2009, you'd find a working environment that eerily echoed the story it was telling. The production wasn't cursed, exactly. It was just uncannily circular, full of déjà vu, odd coincidences, and long days that seemed to start and end in the same place. Crew members joked that they, too, were trapped in a loop, and in a sense they were. Every day was a repeat of the day before, rehearsing and filming the same corridors, the same panic, the same fall into madness. My literature-loving friends, that's what makes its making so fascinating, reality and fiction quietly merged. Director Christopher Smith had made two sharp, fast horror pictures before, Creep and Severance, but Triangle demanded a slower, more psychological rhythm. He described it later as directing grief in geometric form. To keep the tone intimate, he ran a small, tightly knit crew, rarely exceeding 50 people on set. The goal was to mimic the film's claustrophobia. Everyone knew everyone else's job. Camera operators hauled cables. Sound techs moved lights. The director himself sometimes adjusted props. That small scale made the production feel like theater at sea, a handful of humans trapped in a single story together. The shoot split into two phases. The first took place on the Gold Coast, where they built a partial replica of a yacht and filmed the storm in a massive water tank under punishing wind machines. The second unfolded on the Eelis sets inside a cavernous warehouse. To create endless corridors, the art department built modular wall units that could be rearranged overnight. Sometimes, between takes, the crew quietly changed the direction of a hallway, so when the actors resumed the scene, they were genuinely disoriented. Melissa George later said, "I'd walk into what I thought was a dining room and end up back at the staircase. I stopped asking if it was a mistake. It just felt right." The director kept the atmosphere deliberately quiet. There were no loud calls of action. Instead, Smith would murmur, "Go when it feels true." That calm fed into performances. You can sense it in the movie's eerie patience, the feeling that the camera is holding its breath. Smith often played low drones through earpieces while actors performed, giving them an inaudible tension that matched the film's score. It was a psychological trick. The frequency made their pulse quicken without obvious reason. Melissa George's workload bordered on punishing. She was in nearly every frame, often performing 2 or 3 versions of herself in the same day. To help her keep continuity straight, she taped small paper triangles to mirrors on set, each marked with a number for the loop she was inhabiting. Crew members nicknamed her Compass Jess. By the 5th week, exhaustion had become a shared mood. Instead of fighting it, Smith used it. He scheduled emotionally intense scenes toward the end of long days, when fatigue had stripped away performance polish. The trembling in her hands and the glassy look in her eyes in several takes are genuine. Cinematographer Robert Humphreys relied on minimal lighting, mostly practical sources built into the set, to preserve realism, because the film used steady handheld work. Every change in light had to be choreographed. The corridors were narrow, the ceilings low, and crew movement almost impossible. To keep shots fluid, Humphreys devised a harness that let him glide through spaces sideways, camera tucked against his chest like a heartbeat. The resulting motion, smooth but human, is what gives the film its uncanny intimacy. The soundstage itself contributed its own hauntings. The metal floor panels amplified footsteps so loudly that dialogue takes became unusable. Rather than fight it, the sound team recorded those echoes separately and wove them into the final mix, creating the auditory illusion of unseen versions walking alongside the characters. The ship quite literally whispered with its own ghosts. Post-production was an exercise in madness. The editing room looked like a detective's office. Timelines printed on the walls, color-coded threads marking loops, post-it notes forming concentric circles. Smith and editor Stuart Gazzard would replay the same 20-second stretch dozens of times, adjusting one frame, then watching the entire film again to test continuity. Every cut was a moral decision. Gazzard said later, "We weren't just cutting images. We were cutting cause and effect." The process stretched to 9 months, twice what was planned. One lesser-known story involves the sound design sessions. When mixing the scene where Jess discovers a pile of corpses, the team accidentally layered an earlier vocal take backward underneath the ambient track. When they played it, the reverse voice sounded like a faint chant repeating, "Go back." The coincidence unsettled everyone, but Smith kept it. He said it felt like the film talking to itself. The crew's gallows humor kept morale alive. Someone taped a handwritten sign near the exit. "If you leave the stage, you'll just come back again." Another note on the coffee machine read, 8:17, time for caffeine. Even Rap Day followed the theme. When Smith called "That's a picture," the lights in the warehouse flickered, a circuit short from overuse, and the set fell into darkness for 10 seconds before emergency lights snapped on. The crew erupted in nervous laughter. Of course it looped, someone said. The marketing phase brought its own frustrations. Distributors insisted on cutting a conventional trailer with storm shots and screaming, burying the film's existential heart. Smith accepted it. He knew Triangle would find its audience later, the way cult films always do. When the Blu-ray release finally reached fans, he included a commentary track that played like a philosophical conversation. He never explains the loop. He only hints that forgiveness is the one scene missing. Looking back, those who worked on Triangle describe it as one of those productions that changes how you see your craft. It demanded discipline, endurance, and a willingness to be confused. Every crew member walked away convinced they'd shot something bigger than a thriller. As producer Julie Ryan said years later, "We didn't realize we were making a tragedy until we were halfway through. Then we couldn't stop, just like Jess." And that's the haunting truth of its behind-the-scenes story. No chaos, no drama, just quiet, repetitive work, day after day, until art and reality blurred. The movie about endless repetition was born out of endless repetition, and everyone who touched it left a little piece of themselves inside that ship. Even now, when the studio lights have long gone dark, the corridors of the Eelis still exist somewhere in storage, waiting silent, patient like memory itself, for someone to open a door and start the loop again. If you strip Triangle 2009 of its mystery and time loops, what remains is a story so painfully human it almost hurts to look at. Beneath the storm, the ship, and the impossible geometry lies a moral fable about guilt, denial, motherhood, and the infinite ways the human mind can trap itself. The film disguises its psychology behind supernatural architecture, but every twist, every repetition, every echo exists to explore a single question. Can someone truly be forgiven if they cannot forgive themselves? My literature-loving friends, that's the quiet core Triangle, a myth about moral inertia wearing the clothes of a thriller. The central theme is guilt, not the kind that fades with apology, but the deep, cellular guilt that rewires perception. Jessica is deceptively small in form. She snaps at her son in anger, strikes him, and he dies by accident. Yet within that act lies an unbearable contradiction, violence born of love. The film externalizes that paradox through its setting. The endless ship, the looping day, the frozen clock, all symbolize the way guilt suspends time. When we cannot accept what we've done, the world stops moving. We replay the event in our heads, searching for a version that ends differently. Jess's loops are not punishment imposed by some external god. They are the mind's desperate attempt to rewrite its own narrative. Another theme is the illusion of control. Jess keeps insisting she can fix it, that one more attempt will make things right. Each loop begins as a new plan for redemption, and each ends with the same destruction. This mirrors the human instinct to bargain with fate, believing that logic or effort can undo emotional reality. Smith frames her persistence as both heroic and tragic. She refuses surrender, but in refusing, she perpetuates the sin. The message isn't that trying again is futile, but that some wounds demand acceptance, not correction. The ship becomes her therapist, her confessor, her executioner, all patiently waiting for her to understand that truth. The title Triangle operates on multiple symbolic planes. On the surface, it's the yacht's name, but geometrically it represents the impossible balance between past, present, and future. A triangle is the simplest shape that cannot collapse. Each side depends on the others. Likewise, Jess's timeline sustains itself through dependence. Past guilt fuels present action, which recreates the future that becomes a past again. The symbol also carries spiritual connotations, the Christian trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit distorted into mother, child, and guilt. Every loop is a perverse form of rebirth, with Jess delivering herself over and over, unable to end the cycle of creation and loss. Motherhood itself forms the emotional skeleton of the film. Jess's love for her son is sincere, but it's also possessive. She defines herself entirely through that bond. When he dies, her identity collapses, and the loop functions as an unconscious fantasy where she can still be a protector, even if that means protecting him from herself. Each version of Jess, the nurturing one, the violent one, the pleading one, embodies an aspect of motherhood under moral duress. The ship's sterile corridors, lit like hospital wards, evoke both birth and death. In a sense, Triangle reimagines the myth of Medea, but with compassion. A mother who kills her child not out of vengeance, but out of the unbearable pressure of survival. Another recurring symbol is reflection. Mirrors, glass surfaces, even the ocean itself all serve as judgmental eyes. Every time Jess sees herself, literally or metaphorically, the film freezes, as if time needs her acknowledgement to move forward. Reflection here equals accountability, but she keeps looking away, or worse, attacking what she sees. When she kills her masked self, it's not victory, it's denial. The movie's moral lesson hides in that repetition. Every act of self-destruction disguised as progress only deepens the sentence. The ship's name, Eelis, extends the symbolism into myth. In Greek lore, Eelis was a keeper of the winds, living in isolation, neither mortal nor god. His children were trapped with him, endlessly serving his duty. The film repurposes that myth. Jess becomes a modern Eelis, trapped in her own storm, unable to release or contain her winds of guilt. Each gusset returns to the same point as the echo of her own breath, her own sigh of regret turned into weather. Time itself is another major symbol. The clock frozen at 8:17 suggests not just a specific event, but a state of moral stasis. 8:17 is never explained. It's simply the moment of permanence, the eternal now of regret. The movie argues that hell is not a fiery place, but a psychological condition where nothing ever changes, because change will require forgiveness. Every attempt at movement, running, killing, escaping, only reaffirms the stillness. Color symbolism reinforces this metaphysical trap. Blue dominates as the color of illusion and emotional paralysis. Jess's clothing, the sea, the ship's lighting, all bathe her in a hue of denial. Red punctuates moments of violent clarity, blood, warning signs, the brief flare of recognition. Gold and white, normally colors of purity, are used ironically. They mark the false dawns, the calm mornings when she believed the nightmare has ended. The palette tells a cyclical story of its own, oscillating between denial and realization, illusion and truth. The concept of purgatory is central, though never named. Every detail implies it. The cab driver as psychopomp, the endless repetition, the moral lesson unlearned. But Smith avoids religious overtone, preferring a psychological version of purgatory, self-inflicted, not divine. Jess doesn't need a demon. She already is her own warden. The ship is built from her mind, and every death is an erased memory. It's no coincidence that the only living creature outside the ship, the seagull, also repeats endlessly, landing and dying again. Nature, too, mirrors her fate. Even the narrative structure embodies cyclical symbolism. The film's beginning and ending are identical not because of a twist, but because that's what eternity feels like. A story without climax or catharsis. It's a parable of punishment without judgment, an existential statement that the worst thing a soul can suffer is infinite opportunity without progress. Every new chance is just another variant of the same mistake. At its core, Triangle is a meditation on perception and moral blindness. It asks whether awareness alone is enough to free us. Jess becomes self-aware halfway through. She knows she's in a loop, but that knowledge changes nothing. Awareness without acceptance is meaningless. It's a striking commentary on trauma itself. Survivors often replay memories, try and control them, yet remain trapped by the illusion that insight equals healing. The film quietly insists that salvation requires surrender, not understanding. The taxi driver, perhaps the most enigmatic symbol, embodies mercy. He offers her a ride home after death, a final chance to rest. His car is a vessel transition, a literal ferry across guilt's river. But Jess always insists on returning. In that defiance, the film reveals its bleak compassion. Humans rarely accept grace when it contradicts their self-image. She'd rather be punished forever than believe she deserves forgiveness. By blending these symbols, see mirror, time, motherhood, reflection, Triangle transcends genre. It becomes a moral allegory about human repetition. Every viewer recognizes a piece of themselves in Jess. The regret revisited, the apology rehearsed, the moment we wish we could undo. The ship is a subconscious where those memories drift, waiting for confrontation. That's why the film's horror feels so intimate. The monsters aren't supernatural. They're psychological. The loop isn't a curse. It's a choice. And the meaning isn't hidden. It's reflected in every surface Jess refuses to see. When the final loop closes and the sun shines again, we understand that light is not redemption, but exposure. There's no escape from truth, only the grace of acceptance. Until Jess can say, I forgive myself, the storm will keep gathering, the ship will keep returning, and 817 will keep striking endlessly across the silent sea of memory. From its very first frame, Triangle, 2009, announces itself as something different. The film's tone, pace, and rhythm all whisper rather than shout. Christopher Smith crafted it like a clockmaker assembling a mechanism. Each scene calibrated to trigger the next loop with surgical precision. What makes Triangle unforgettable isn't its twist, but its construction. Every choice, from camera angles to sound design, reinforces the idea of repetition and entrapment. It's a film about déjà vu that feels like déjà vu, and it achieves that effect through meticulous technical design. My literature-loving friends, this is one of those rare thrillers that teaches us how form can become meaning. Smith and cinematographer Robert Humphreys decided early that the movie would live in two distinct visual languages, reality and recursion. The yacht scenes were shot handheld, with natural light and warm tones, to convey human fragility. Once the characters board the Eelis, the camera tightens, steadies, and the color palette drains to cold silver and gray. This visual transition marks the boundary between the world of time and the world outside it. Even if viewers don't consciously register the shift, they feel it. The world becomes heavier, denser, more symmetrical. The geometry of the frame became the film's grammar. Triangular compositions appear everywhere. A mass forming an apex above the crew, staircases converging to a vanishing point, corridors slicing into diagonal lines. Humphreys used wide-angle lenses to elongate depth, creating optical illusions where background and foreground seem to collapse. Every composition traps Jess in invisible shapes, like a fly in glass. Even when she's centered in the frame, the lines behind her tilt inward, turning space itself into a cage. Lighting choices enhance the psychological effect. The ship's interiors glow with fluorescents that flicker just out of sync. Smith instructed his lighting team to randomize the intervals, so no two flickers matched. Small chaos within perfect structure. It creates the sense that the ship is alive, breathing through electricity. During intense scenes, practical light sources like lamps and mirrors are always visible, reminding us that there's no unseen hand guiding illumination, only Jess's reflection. The brightest light in the film appears not in safety but in guilt, the blinding Florida sun during the final act. It's almost overexposed, washing away detail the same way denial washes away memory. The editing by Stuart Gazzard might be Triangle's most important achievement. Instead of cross-cutting for speed, he relies on pattern recognition. Scenes recur with minor variations, and the audience subconsciously becomes complicit in tracking them. The rhythm is hypnotic. Long pauses followed by sudden bursts of motion. Each loop quickens slightly, tightening the duration between key events, mimicking the acceleration of obsession. What's genius is that Smith never repeats a shot identically. Something always changes. Sometimes it's a camera angle, sometimes a sound perspective, sometimes Jess's eye line. Those micro-variations make the viewer's brain work, searching for differences, feeling the madness of repetition. Sound design is equally crucial. The ship's creaks, hums, and echoes are mixed with impossible precision. Every time a loop resets, the frequency of background hum rises slightly, so slight that the viewer doesn't notice consciously, but their nerves do. It's psychological tuning. The movie's minimal score, composed of drones, reverse strings, and low brass pulses, follows an auditory spiral. It builds tension, collapses, and rebuilds again in near-identical form. When Jess kills a version of herself, the music abruptly cuts to silence, leaving only the echo of her breath. That void becomes a recurring motif. Sound withdrawal as moral vacuum. One of the cleverest technical feats is Smith's use of camera perspective to hide and reveal loops. For instance, when Jess runs to the corridor in panic, we assume the camera is following her in real time. Later, we see the same scene from a higher angle and realize the earlier camera position belonged to another Jess watching her. That recursive viewpoint transforms the audience into part of the structure. We, 2. Become the ship's ghosts. Practical effects dominate over CGI. The storm sequence used real wind and water cannons, with handheld cameras covered in plastic housings. The chaos feels authentic because actors were genuinely drenched, their dialogue shouted over roaring fans. Smith insisted on real elements to ground the supernatural concept in physical discomfort. It's the rare psychological thriller that also feels tactile. You can sense a chill of metal, the sting of salt. The film's pacing obeys what Smith called loop symmetry. The runtime of 99 minutes divides cleanly into 3 33-minute cycles, each marking a new emotional phase: denial, recognition, punishment. Even the transitions between loops are mathematically timed. The storm reappears at minute 33 and minute 66, acting as a metronome of fate. It's not a coincidence. It's structural poetry. Color grading also tells its own story. Digital post-production gave Smith the freedom to desaturate the ship's palette until nearly monochrome, while retaining warm skin tones. That contrast, warm life against cold environment, embodies a central conflict: humanity trapped in machinery. When Jess returned to land, the colors flared unnatural brightness, suggesting that the real world is just another layer of illusion. The use of mirrors and reflections is a technical marvel as much as a symbol. Many shots use double surfaces, windows, metal panels, even puddles, so that Jess's face appears twice within the frame. Often, one reflection lags by a few frames, created in post through compositing. The result is subtle but uncanny, a literal delay between self and self, guilt and realization. Even the choreography of violence is deliberate. Smith avoids gore, preferring repetition. Every kill happens in roughly the same rhythm: impact, gasp, silence, like beats in a confession. The horror becomes ritualistic. The viewer's fear shifts from what will happen to how it will replay. This stylistic restraint separates Triangle from conventional slashers. It's a film about consequence, not carnage. The box office story, however, belongs to tragedy. Released in late 2009 in the UK and Australia, the film suffered from marketing confusion. Trailers sold it as a ghost ship horror with cheap scares, alienating its ideal audience, the lovers of cerebral thrillers. Its limited theatrical run grossed only about $1.6 million, a fraction of its $12 million budget. It faded quickly from cinemas, overshadowed by louder genre releases. But like its protagonist, Triangle refused to die. On DVD and streaming, the film resurrected. Word of mouth spread through online forums and review blogs, where viewers praised its structure and depth. Over time, it gained cult status, much like Donnie Darko or Coherence. The irony is poetic. A movie about loops found its own resurrection through repetition, rediscovered, reinterpreted, rewatched. Each new audience became another iteration of the cycle. Critics later noted that its limited success might have been essential. If Triangle had been a mainstream hit, its mystery would have been dissected and exhausted too soon. Instead, it lives in quiet eternity, finding fresh viewers who stumble upon it by accident, much like Jess stumbling upon the ship. Its home media sales eventually surpassed its theatrical earnings many times over, vindicating its artistry. Technically, Triangle stands as one of the most precise exercises in circular storytelling in modern cinema. Every frame, sound, and cut works toward the same metaphysical aim: to make the audience feel the trap of repetition. There are no wasted shots, no unnecessary exposition, no external explanations. Smith trusted form to carry philosophy. In the end, the filmmaking itself becomes a final symbol. The camera loops, the edits loop, the soundtrack loops, the audience loops. The act of watching Triangle is an act of participation. You complete the cycle by returning to it. And when you do, it feels different each time, because you've changed while it hasn't. That, perhaps, is the truest mark of its craft. A film so precisely built that it transforms static images into a living moral mechanism. That's the paradox of its legacy, an underperforming box office film that quietly became immortal. Like its heroine, Triangle sails endlessly to the fog, misunderstood but enduring, forever returning to those who are ready to recognize themselves in its reflection. When Triangle 2009 first surfaced, the people who made it didn't expect it to become one of the most talked about psychological horror films of the century. Its cast wasn't enormous. It had no marketing juggernaut or awards campaign. But over time, each performer's contribution became legendary among fans who studied the film the way readers study scripture. My literature-loving friends, this step belongs to those who breathed life into the story's geometry, the actors who made repetition feel human, the critics who slowly learned to hear what the film was whispering, and the audiences who couldn't stop returning to it. Melissa George carries the entire movie on her shoulders. Nearly every shot includes her face, and within that face exists a dozen personalities, not invented alter egos, but emotional phases of one fractured woman. In interviews, she has said that Jess was the hardest role of her career because it demanded infinite empathy for the same mistake. She didn't play a villain or a victim, but a person locked in moral algebra. To prepare, she built what she called her loop diary, a small notebook divided into sections marked guilt, anger, denial, resolve, collapse. Before every take, she'd read one word to orient herself. She described the process as like living inside an echo chamber where you argue with yourself all day. Her performance earned praise from genre critics, yet mainstream outlets barely noticed at the time. Years later, retrospectives called her work one of the finest portrayals of psychological disintegration in modern horror. Michael Dorman, who played Greg, remembered the filming as a strange kind of meditation. He told Total Film that Smith encouraged actors to perform as if the dialogue had already been said before, an instruction that made sense only when they saw the final cut. Dorman approached Greg as a man of reason inside someone else's nightmare, anchoring the chaos with empathy. His understated warmth gives a movie its one thread of normalcy. When he disappears, the viewer feels a loss like a snapped line in rough seas. Liam Hemsworth, barely 19 then, had one of his first substantial screen roles as Victor. Audiences today find it surreal to see a future blockbuster star wandering the ghostly halls of Eelis. During filming, he was mostly quiet, studying Smith's direction. In later interviews, he called Triangle my education in restraint, saying he learned that fear doesn't require screaming. It requires silence. He also admitted that he didn't understand the plot until he saw it with an audience. When the credits rolled, nobody spoke. That's when I knew it worked. Rachael, Carpani, and Henry Nixon filled smaller, but essential spaces. Carpani's Sally embodies panic's logic. Her hysteria isn't weakness, but realism. Nixon, as a taxi driver, left a larger imprint than his screen time suggests. Smith gave him minimal instruction, only that he should play the scene like a man who already knows the ending. Nixon delivered with eerie calm, and years later fans still debate whether his half-smile at the roadside was kindness or irony. Director Christopher Smith's interviews reveal how collaborative the cast's work truly was. He never dictated definitive answers about meaning, preferring to let the actors play each moment as genuine confusion. If they don't know what's happening, he said, then neither does the audience, and that's honest. During the loop scenes, he filmed the same dialogue 3 or 4 times with tiny emotional shifts. Then he'd decide in editing which version felt most haunted. That method demanded extraordinary trust from his performers. Melissa George later joked, "We shot so many variations that I thought Chris might make 3 different movies." Critics gradually learned to see the brilliance they'd missed in 2009. Early reviews fixated on its puzzle. Later ones praised its humanity. RogerEbert.com's retrospective called it a tragic character study disguised as a horror film. Film theorist Alexandra Heller-Nicholas compared it to Mulholland Drive and Jacob's Ladder, writing that George's performance invites empathy even when logic collapses. Academic essays popped up across film journals, analyzing the movie through feminist, mythic, and psychoanalytic lenses. The consensus formed slowly. Triangle was a masterpiece that required time. Fitting for a story about time refusing to move forward. Audiences, however, discovered it through emotion, not analysis. On forums and Reddit threads, viewers shared eerily similar reactions. First confusion, then shock, then a lingering melancholy that lasted days. Many described dreaming about the ship afterward, hearing phantom footsteps in the dark. Others connected to Jess's guilt on a personal level. Parents who'd lost temper with children, people haunted by irreversible mistakes. One comment that circulated widely said, It's the only horror movie that made me want to apologize to someone. Fan theories blossomed into miniature philosophies. Some argued that the Eelis was limbo. Others claimed Jess was in a coma, reliving trauma. A few suggested that each version of Jess represented one of the 5 stages of grief. Smith, when asked which was right, always smiled and said, all of them. That ambiguity became part of the movie's charm. Every viewer could project their own loop of meaning onto it. At conventions years later, fans approached Melissa George with emotional stories. One woman told her that Triangle helped her process guilt over her own child's accident. George said that encounter changed how she saw the film. I realized Jess wasn't just trapped. She was teaching people how to face themselves. That unexpected resonance transformed what had been a small thriller into a quiet cult phenomenon of healing through horror. Cinephiles praise the ensemble's subtle unity. There are no caricatures, no grand speeches. Everyone behaves like an ordinary person in extraordinary confusion. That realism grounds the movie's metaphysics. When violence erupts, it hurts because the people feel real. When time resets, we mourn because their deaths still matter. It's a rare horror film where empathy survives the loop. Even casual viewers who stumble upon Triangle today find themselves captivated. Reviews on modern streaming platforms overflow with words like haunting, heartbreaking, and masterpiece. Many first-time viewers confess to rewatching immediately, desperate to spot new details. The movie seems built for rediscovery. The second viewing reveals patterns invisible first time, mirroring Jess's own realization. It's as if the film has consciousness, rewarding those who repeat it. In 2020, a 10-year anniversary online panel reunited Smith and George. They spoke via video call, smiling through memories of exhaustion. It felt like a confession on camera. George said softly. Smith replied, "You gave it, soul." He then revealed he'd kept the prop clock from the set, frozen at 8:17, as a reminder that stories like guilt never really end. What makes Triangle endure isn't celebrity or spectacle, but the sincerity of its cast. Everyone involved treated the material not as a riddle, but as truth disguised in horror. Their restraint, honesty, and emotional precision allowed the film to transcend its budget. Over time, audiences realized they weren't watching actors and plot. They were watching people caught between grace and punishment. That's why the audience response remains so passionate. Every rewatch feels personal. Every discussion sounds like confession. Viewers don't talk about Triangle the way they talk about most films. They talk about what it did to them. It has become more than entertainment. A shared dream replayed across screens, late at night, when guilt feels loud and silence feels alive. And in that way, the cast, the director, the critics, and the audience all became part of the same eternal story. People watching themselves in the mirror of a small, haunting film that refuses to let anyone go once they've looked into its eyes. There are some films that feel like mirrors held up to the human soul, quietly reflecting what we'd rather not see, and Triangle 2009 belongs to that rare lineage. Watching it feels less like entertainment and more like confession. It's not a movie that shouts or dazzles. It circles you, patient and merciless, until you realize the reflection on the screen has started to look a little too familiar. My literature-loving friends, finishing this analysis feels like stepping off the Eelis itself, dazed, contemplative, haunted by echoes that refuse to fade. When I first experienced it, I thought I was watching a supernatural thriller about a woman trapped in a time loop. But as the layers peeled back, what emerged was something more delicate and devastating. A story about how guilt bends reality, how regret turns memory into an endless hallway, and how love can transform into punishment when it's mixed with fear. It's a parable told through horror, mythology stitched into modern psychology. And the longer you sit with it, the clearer it becomes that the film's loop isn't merely a narrative device. It's a condition of human consciousness itself. Every time we replay an argument in our heads, imagine a different outcome, or whisper to ourselves, if only I had done this instead, we build our own Eelis. We become Jess, walking corridors of our own making, trying to rewrite the moments that broke us. Christopher Smith's genius lies in recognizing that punishment doesn't need demons. It just needs memory. He turned that insight into cinema that feels eternal. The film's tragedy lies not in death, but in its absence. No one really dies in Triangle, They simply repeat. That's the most terrifying and beautiful idea it offers. Immortality without progress. The ship keeps floating. The storm keeps forming. The clock keeps freezing at 8:17. It's hell rendered as routine. Horror disguised as hope. Jess doesn't suffer because she's evil. She suffers because she still believes she can make things right. That illusion is the hardest one to let go of. And yet, within that endless repetition, there's compassion. Smith doesn't treat Jess with cruelty. He films her with sorrow. The camera never mocks her confusion, never indulges in her violence. It simply watches, as if waiting for her to forgive herself. That patience is the film's moral center. It's the same patience we owe ourselves when facing our own past. In that way, Triangle becomes a mirror, not a damnation, but of empathy. Cinematically, the film closes where it begins, but emotionally, it ends in silence. Jess steps back onto the yacht, her expression serene, almost gentle. It's not ignorance, it's surrender. She knows she's going back into the loop, and that strange calmness feels like acceptance. Maybe that's what grace looks like, not freedom, but understanding. The loop may continue, but her resistance softens. For a story built on punishment, it ends with something close to mercy. Every element we've explored, its structure, performances, sound, color, and mythology, works toward one unified goal: to show that horror isn't the storm, it's the mind trying to control it. The ship is guilt made physical. The sea is time. The light is denial. The mirror is truth. Watching it feels like hearing a secret from someone who's been dead a long time, but still wants to warn you. It says, be kind to your mistakes before they start repeating themselves. What makes Triangle endure is that its mystery deepens with every viewing. Each time you return, the movie seems to shift, like a dream retold from memory. You notice new details. The color of a reflection, the way silence lingers after a scream, the faint look of recognition in Jess's eyes before she kills another version of herself. The more you watch, the closer it gets. Not to revelation, but to recognition. That's its paradoxical gift. Clarity that leads to humility. And that's why Triangle still matters. In an age when films chase spectacle, it chases introspection. It tells us that our worst prisons are self-built, that our truest hauntings come from conscience, and that every act of self-judgment keeps the cycle alive. It offers no easy answers, but it gives us something more enduring, a language for regret, a shape for grief, and a way to understand the endlessness of memory. When the credits roll and the screen fades to black, you might feel a strange stillness, as if the air is thickened. You might even look at your reflection in a window and half expect it to move differently than you do. That's Triangle's final trick. It doesn't end when it ends. It lingers, looping quietly inside you, asking one last question. If given another chance, would you really do things differently, or would you just repeat them again? For me, that's what makes it a masterpiece. Not the puzzle, not the twist, but the ache it leaves behind. The reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to step off the ship and accept the shore exactly as it is. So to all of you, my literature-loving friends, who've traveled through these 13 steps with me, thank you for walking the corridors of memory and morality this far. If the story has circled back to you tonight, maybe it's not an accident. Maybe the loop brought you here for a reason. To see, in Jess's eyes, the quiet truth we all share, that forgiveness is the only real way forward. And if you felt something in these reflections, if this deep, haunting film whispered to a part of you that still seeks meaning in the storm, then please, subscribe, and stay with me here on Cinema Vault. We'll keep exploring cinema not as escape, but as revelation, where every frame holds another secret, and every story is a mirror waiting for someone brave enough to look.